AITA for not feeling bad my ex lost custody after suing me for more money? There I was, holding a manila envelope that felt heavier than my will to live. While Melanie looked at me with the smile of someone who had just won the lottery without buying a ticket. The document was not a dinner invitation or a congratulatory card for my recent promotion, but a court filing demanding an amount of money so absurd it made me wonder if my children were eating cereal or 24-karat gold nuggets for breakfast. I still cannot process how a simple change in my job title at the office ended up turning my existence into a courtroom drama where logic was the first to file for divorce. Melanie and I were married for 8 years, a time I would describe as a sociological experiment on how much control one person can exert over another before the test subject moves into his own place. Our separation was due to what lawyers call irreconcilable differences, but I prefer to call it she wanted to control my breathing frequency, and I wanted to keep using my lungs on my own terms. For 3 years after signing the papers, I managed to navigate the chaos by paying a more than fair amount of child support for my 2 children while trying to ignore the background noise. Melanie was not a normal ex-wife. She was a sort of unofficial tax auditor who would show up at the most inconvenient times with a mental notebook ready to jot down my expenses. That background noise became part of my daily routine, like the hum of an old refrigerator you do not even hear anymore until it suddenly explodes. Every time she saw me with a new pair of shoes or posting a photo of myself eating a hamburger that was not from the value menu, I would receive a text message with the same threatening tone. She would tell me to enjoy my success while I could, because one of these days we would see each other in court for a necessary reality check. I had normalized her threats of a lawsuit so much that I mentally filed them away with spam emails and campaign promises from politicians, believing her stubbornness had a limit based on legal laziness. However, my promotion to senior director at the company was the trigger that made her money radar go off with the intensity of a lighthouse in a storm. It was not even 72 hours after I updated my LinkedIn profile that the manila envelope arrived at my door, marking the end of our imaginary truce. Melanie did not want a piece of the cake. She wanted the whole bakery, the oven, and even the baker's apron, based on the idea that my professional success was a personal affront to her budget. It was at that moment that I felt something inside me click, and it was not my back from the stress, but my patience, which had finally retired. I realized that if she really wanted to go through the legal system, I was not going to be the one to trip over her feet or set the rhythm. This time was different. I had spent years negotiating on the side, giving in to ridiculous whims to avoid drama. But the petition for triple the child support was the straw that broke the camel's back of my diplomacy. I decided my best weapon would not be to attack, but to maintain absolute silence and a suspicious level of obedience to the legal process she herself had initiated. I kept my sarcasm to myself and prepared to let Melanie walk herself into the deep review she claimed would destroy me. My first strategic move was not to resist the start of the process, something that seemed to unsettle her more than if I had yelled in her face. When my lawyer notified her that we would not attempt private mediation and would go straight to a hearing in family court, she interpreted it as a sign of my supposed early defeat. I, on the other hand, began preparing every receipt, every invoice, and every bank statement with a surgical precision that gave me a strange sense of peace. I knew Melanie was counting on me to try to hide income because that is what she would have done in my place, projecting her own ethics onto my finances. I asked my lawyer to demand the process be as thorough as possible, requesting expert evaluations and reviews from both sides so there would be no doubts left hanging. Melanie celebrated every legal move as if she were scoring goals in a World Cup final, never suspecting she was digging a hole she would struggle to get out of. I simply watched her enthusiasm from the sidelines, maintaining a poker face that one only masters after years of putting up with complaints about the brand of toilet paper I bought. I was determined not to be the villain in her story, but the spectator of her own self-sabotage, allowing her ambition to dictate the rules of the game. Communication between us was reduced to strictly formal emails, which was a relief to my mental health that I cannot describe in words. She tried several times to get under my skin with passive-aggressive messages about how my children would realize how stingy I was. But I only replied with a polite received, "Thank you." It was almost funny to see how much it bothered her that I did not defend myself, did not fight back, and did not give her the conflict spectacle she so desperately needed to feed her victim narrative. My plan was simple: be the most boring and transparent man in the world in front of the judge, and let Melanie's creativity do the rest of the dirty work. I began to notice her confidence morphing into a kind of liturgical arrogance, where she saw herself as the owner of the truth in my bank account. I heard rumors from mutual friends about how she was already planning what to spend the extra money on that the judge would supposedly grant her without question. I just smiled, adjusted my tie, and reviewed my files one more time, making sure every penny was justified and every expense for the children was documented. The era of coffee shop threats and complaints about new shoes was over. We were in the big leagues of bureaucracy now, and I had my uniform on. I cannot deny I felt a twinge of nervousness, but it was the kind of nervousness you feel before watching a movie when you have already been told the satisfying ending. Melanie was so obsessed with the amount of my new salary that she completely forgot the judicial system also reviews the expenses and lifestyle of the person filing the petition. She assumed the judge would only have eyes for my pay stubs, conveniently ignoring that fairness is a two-way street. My lawyer told me to stay calm, that her stubbornness was our greatest ally, and that Melanie's litigious profile was an open book for someone with experience. The tension in the air was palpable whenever we met at the lawyer's office for the exchange of preliminary documents. She would walk in with a folder full of clippings and notes, as if she were building a case against an international cartel instead of a child support review. I, in contrast, carried my tablet with everything digitized and an "I am just here because I was invited" attitude, which seemed to irritate her deeply. It was obvious she was expecting a war of accusations, not a technical delivery of financial data that left no room for the creative interpretation she was looking for. At the end of that first block of legal drama, I felt strangely light, as if letting go of control of the situation had given me back the power. Melanie still believed she had me on the ropes, not understanding that I had cut the ropes myself so she would fall on her back from her own weight. I promised myself I would not intervene to save her from her own mistakes, something I used to do frequently during our marriage to avoid scandals. This time, if she wanted the system to decide our future, I would let the system do its job without any filters or protections for me. Update 1. A month has passed since the last update, and things have gone from a simple legal dispute to a social spectacle worthy of a low-budget soap opera. Everything was going relatively well, considering I have a petition hanging over my head, until Melanie decided the courthouse was too small a stage for her dramatic talent. She started proclaiming my supposed financial issues in the elementary school's parent Facebook group, a place where usually only snacks and exam dates are discussed. It seemed her new strategy was to ruin my professional and personal reputation before we even set foot in court, accusing me in front of everyone of leaving my children in poverty while I lived a life of luxury. The most ironic part is that her great proof of my opulence was a designer watch I started wearing after the promotion, an item that is actually a $10 knockoff I bought at a flea market. Seeing Melanie point at my wrist in the school parking lot as if I were wearing a platinum Rolex was one of the most surreal moments of this whole process. I just responded with, I do not know what you are talking about," smile, and kept walking to my SUV, avoiding getting into the mud of her public provocations. I knew that any word I said in that parent group would be used against me, so I opted for administrative silence and a formal email to the school administration asking for neutrality. The social cost was immediate. Suddenly, I noticed that a couple of parents I used to joke about soccer with stopped saying hello or took the long way around to avoid crossing paths with me. It is funny how people buy into a well-told victim story without asking for a single receipt to back it up. But that is the ecosystem of school parent Facebook groups for you. However, the real turn of events happened when Melanie, in her quest to prove I was earning too much money, began to sabotage her own image as a needy mother, to justify that she also deserved an increase in her standard of living. She started posting pictures on her social media from high-end spas and upscale restaurants, calling them emotional wellness expenses. Her logic, if you can call it that, was that if I was now a senior director, she, by extension, deserved a lifestyle that reflected her children's status. I do not know what law manual she read that said child support includes spa visits for the mother, but she was convinced she was sending a message of empowerment. What she did not know was that my lawyer, a man who lives for these kinds of tactical errors, was already taking screenshots of every single one of those Instagram stories with the precision of a sniper. Every time she posted a photo of her glass of champagne with a caption about justice for my kids, she handed us another piece of her incoherence puzzle. I continued with my low-profile life, working extra hours to prove that my promotion was the result of hard work and not a magical source of money to fund wellness retreats. The feeling of being watched by other parents was uncomfortable, but I held firm to my policy of not giving explanations to those who do not deserve them. Melanie, on the other hand, seemed to feed on the attention, organizing meetings with other mothers to explain why I was the corporate villain of her life. I found out from a neighbor that she even claimed I was hiding accounts in tax havens, an assertion that made me genuinely laugh as I looked at my balance to pay the mortgage. The gap between the reality of my finances and the fiction she was building grew wider and wider, and I just had to wait for gravity to do its job. Trying to contain the damage to my reputation was like trying to block the sun with one finger. So I decided to let her get burned by her own light. The aggressiveness of her social media posts began to cross the line of what is legally prudent, mentioning my company and my position directly. My lawyer simply rubbed his hands together every time I sent him a new link to her public profiles, reminding me that patience is a virtue that pays off handsomely in court. There was a particularly ridiculous moment when she tried to confront me at my front door as I was unloading groceries from my SUV, raising her voice about how I could buy name brand cheese while my children suffered. The truth is, it was cheese on sale with a 50% discount at the supermarket. But for Melanie, anything that was not a generic brand was irrefutable proof of my hidden wealth. The neighbors peeked out their windows, and I felt a mix of discomfort and fascination at the level of detail she put into her surveillance. I politely asked her to leave and to save her comments for the hearing, closing the door with a calmness that must have irritated her more than any insult. Despite the chaos, seeing my kids on the weekends was my anchor. Even though Melanie would try to question them afterward about what they ate or what new toys I had bought them, they are, luckily, smart enough to know that their mom is going through an intensive legal phase, as they innocently call it. I made sure their time with me was as normal as possible, far from expense charts and lawyer dramas, giving them the stability their mother seemed to have traded for a judicial obsession. I knew the first serious consequence to my reputation was already there, but I also knew that the truth has a very curious way of showing up when you least expect it. The month ended with Melanie sending me a list of extraordinary expenses that included a life coaching course for families in crisis, which she wanted me to pay for in full. My response was the same as always. Please submit this request through the appropriate legal channels, which was my polite way of telling her to ask the judge. She replied with a series of angry emojis and threats that my downfall would be monumental and public. I could only think that if she kept spending on spas to emotionally represent our children, the only monument we would see would be that of her own poor judgment. Update 2. 3 months have passed since the last update, and the playing field has finally moved to the courtroom, where reality tends to collide head-on with fantasy. Everything was proceeding according to legal protocol until we reached the preliminary hearing. And Melanie, true to her stubbornly determined profile, decided that any settlement was an offense to her dignity. My lawyer and I presented an offer that even exceeded what the guidelines require, just to end the theatrics and regain some peace. However, she rejected the proposal before we even finished reading it, claiming she was not looking for a settlement, but for total victory and a public acknowledgement of my supposed wrongdoings. To support her demand to triple the child support, she presented a list of monthly expenses that would have made a Silicon Valley millionaire blush. It included, with a frightening seriousness, high-performance equestrian lessons for our 2 children, despite the fact that both of them are terrified of horses and cry if they get near a pony. She also added a home management fee for herself, arguing that her time organizing the children's lives had a market value that I should cover. Judge Harlan, a serious man who looked like he had seen it all in family court, began to review the papers with agonizing slowness. The climax came when the judge, adjusting his glasses, asked Melanie why her personal expenses on clothing and beauty had increased by 200% in recent months if the petition was supposedly to cover the children's needs. Melanie, instead of giving a coherent explanation or simply keeping quiet, decided the best course of action was to argue with the judge about his own tone of voice. She began to say that the question was biased and that the judge was viewing things through a traditional lens of the domestic economy, claiming that she needed to be well and confident for the children to be well. The air in the room became so thick you could almost cut it with a knife, while my lawyer gave me a discreet nudge so I would not smile. Judge Harlan raised an eyebrow so high I thought it would fly off his forehead, maintaining a heavy silence for several seconds. Given Melanie's insistence that I was hiding income and that my lifestyle was an insult to motherhood, the judge made a decision she never saw coming. He ordered full psychological and social evaluations for both of us, as well as a forensic review of our financial accounts for the past 2 years. Incredibly, Melanie started celebrating right there in the courtroom, stating that there would finally be transparency and that my house of cards would come crashing down. I simply nodded, knowing my accounts were cleaner than an operating room and that the evaluations would reveal realities she did not want to accept. In the following weeks, visits from the court-appointed evaluator became a constant, which I accepted with complete willingness. I opened the doors of my suburban home to them, showed them my bank statements, and allowed them to speak freely with my children without intervening or trying to influence their answers. Melanie, on the other hand, started seeing issues around every corner, treating the experts as if they were her personal employees who had to agree with her on everything. I heard reports that she tried to impress the evaluator by showing her expensive clothes that she claimed I supposedly prevented her from buying, falling once again into her own trap of contradictions. Her tactic of doubling down consisted of hiring a private investigator to follow me, hoping to find me in some high-end casino or buying luxury items. The only thing the investigator found were long hours at the office, visits to the gym, and entire afternoons at the park with my children eating vanilla ice cream. Melanie was so convinced of my wrongdoing that she started inventing events in her head to fill the gaps that reality was not providing. The pattern of chaos was already evident to anyone but her. She was spending money she did not have on a legal battle she was losing because of her own arrogance. During one of our brief encounters while picking up the kids, she told me with an intense gaze that the psychological evaluation would prove I am a manipulative person who has them influenced. I could only think how ironic it was that she was using self-help terms while trying to force her children to ride horses that terrified them just for a social media photo. I stayed in my role as a spectator, enjoying my mental popcorn as I watched her fight the system, the judge, and the most basic logic. Stubbornness has a price, and Melanie was writing checks that her stability could not cash. My lawyer warned me that she would probably try a last-minute maneuver to invalidate the evidence that did not favor her, but that the judge already had his eye on her. Melanie's behavior in the courtroom had stripped her of any benefit of the doubt she might have had at the beginning as a parent seeking support. It was no longer a question of how much money I earned, but how reasonable she was as an administrator of that money and as a maternal figure. I continued to set clear boundaries, refusing any communication that was not strictly necessary and documenting every public incident. The atmosphere became strangely calm for me as she sank into a whirlwind of paperwork, complaints, and stress because things were not going as they do in her favorite legal dramas. My children began to notice the difference between the peace in my house and the tense environment they experienced with her, which broke my heart but also reaffirmed my position. I could not save her from herself, and every time I had tried in the past, I ended up getting burned. Now, I was letting the process reveal the truth, hoping it would allow us to build something healthier for the children. At the end of this period, We received notice that the experts' reports were ready and a date was set for the results hearing. Melanie continued to post cryptic messages about how light would overcome darkness, ignoring that the light of facts is usually very harsh on those who bend to truth. I just prepared my gray suit, checked that my $10 watch had a battery, and got ready to hear what fate, or Judge Harlan, had to say. Melanie's poor judgment had led her to the edge, and she still thought she had the advantage. Update 3. 5 months have passed since the last update, and Melanie's house of cards has not just fallen. It seems to have been run over by reality. Everything was going fine until the court-appointed evaluator made an unannounced visit to Melanie's place and encountered a scene that looked like something out of an overly focused investigation. The report we received later described how the home, which should have been a sanctuary for the children, had been transformed into a legal operations center. There were stacks of case files everywhere, recordings and notes about me playing on a loop, and whiteboards full of diagrams trying to connect my expenses to supposed schemes. Melanie, far from being embarrassed, tried to convince the evaluator that all this mess was educational material for the children to learn about the value of justice and standing up for oneself. I learned from the detailed report that she even tried to question the evaluator about personal views, claiming she needed to ensure a fair process free from bias. It was a move so out of line that the evaluator noted that Melanie's ability to distinguish between her legal focus and everyday parenting was seriously impacted. Meanwhile, at my house, the evaluator only found a video game console, completed homework, and 2 children who could not cite a single legal detail. The final blow came with Melanie's psychological report, which was clear and direct. The psychologist concluded that her extreme fixation on the litigation and her need for financial control completely clouded her ability to attend to the emotional needs of the children. The report mentioned that she used the children as tools for her disputes with me, turning every visit into questioning about my finances. Melanie, true to her style of rejecting what she did not like, tried to challenge the psychologist and the findings. That desperation to discredit anyone who did not agree with her was what ultimately weakened her position in the eyes of the court. I did not have to say a single negative word. The professional reports spoke for themselves with technical clarity that was damaging to her claims. Seeing Melanie in the courtroom trying to explain that her planning boards were critical thinking tools was one of the most revealing moments of this entire process. She was no longer focused solely on the children or the support. She was fighting to keep alive a version of events where she was the hero and I was the problem, even though the facts stated the exact opposite. The saddest part of this stage was noticing how the children began to ask to stay with me longer, saying that at Mom's place, there was always tension with phone calls to lawyers. It broke my heart to see them so tired from a conflict they did not ask for, but at the same time, it gave me the strength to continue with the process to the very end. Melanie was so caught in her own perspective that she did not even realize she was losing the most valuable thing by pursuing a child support increase that was already impossible to justify. Her strategy had only succeeded in highlighting the environment she had created. She even tried to file a formal complaint against Judge Harlan for perceived bias, a maneuver my lawyer described as a serious misstep. Every step she took moved her further from custody and closer to concerns about stability that the judge could not ignore. I remained steadfast in my home, making sure it was the safe, normal, and game-filled place the children desperately needed. There were no complex diagrams on my walls, just school drawings and reminders that Saturday was pizza night, regardless of what any court said. The final report from the evaluator was the last major piece, recommending a review of the custody arrangement due to the unstable environment. Melanie reacted by posting a video on social media where she expressed distress, saying the system was against her for being a strong, independent woman. Her own followers began to question her, as the video was filmed at the same upscale spa that had already raised issues. The lack of awareness in this situation is something that stands out. At that point, I no longer felt anger, just a deep fatigue and the certainty that the end was near. Melanie had turned her life into a court file and had forgotten how to be a person, a mother, or even a functional parent in daily life. My lawyer told me to prepare for the final ruling because after what the experts had seen, Judge Harlan was not going to overlook the patterns. I just wanted peace to be the soundtrack of my life again, not the constant noise of legal notifications. The atmosphere before the final hearing was one of tense calm. Like those moments before a storm you have been expecting for months finally breaks. Melanie continued to send lengthy emails to everyone, including her apartment complex management, because according to her, the beige color of the hallway carpet was causing her significant stress related to the case. It was clear that her need for conflict was driving things forward without restraint. I just bought my kids new shoes, normal ones without any luxury, and waited for the judge to put an end to this situation once and for all. Update 4. A month has passed since the final judgment, and the action Melanie started with such intent came back with significant consequences for her position. On the day of the ruling, the courtroom was in absolute silence. Except for the sound of Melanie tapping the table nervously, Judge Harlan was direct. He not only denied the child support increase, but, based on the expert reports describing her home as an unstable and overly focused environment, he decided that full custody of the children should go to me. It was a development she never anticipated because she was too focused on the financial outcome. The judge's reasoning was clear. He stated that Melanie's intense focus on money and her behavior during the process demonstrated that she was not in the best position to provide an emotionally stable environment. At that moment, Melanie lost what little composure remained and began to raise her voice in the courtroom, claiming the judge was biased, which was a serious misstep. Judge Harlan, without hesitation, addressed the disruption as contempt of court and ordered that any visitation rights would be conditional on her starting mandatory psychological counseling. The situation required her to be escorted from the courtroom while she continued her objections. Because I now have full custody, the judge had to recalculate child support, and technically, Melanie should have been the one paying support. However, the judge determined that, given her circumstances, child support would be set to 0 so that she could use those resources for her own necessary treatment and stability. Basically, Melanie sued for triple the amount and ended up with a complete change in the arrangement, the child support, the custody, and even limitations on her complaints without professional oversight. The final result is that my house has regained a silence I have not known in years, and my children have stopped talking about legal matters and have gone back to just being kids. Melanie, far from learning her lesson, has now turned her energy against her apartment complex management, sending lengthy letters because the beige tone of the carpets causes her stress. I have been told the neighbors are already discussing the situation, but she remains convinced that she is the victim of a larger issue. I, on the other hand, am left with peace of mind, custody of what I love most, and a promotion I can finally enjoy without feeling that every professional success is an invitation to court. My life is now refreshingly normal. We work, we play, and if I order an extra pizza, I do not have to worry if it will show up in any disputes the following week. The kids are calm, their grades have improved, and they no longer have to witness financial questioning during family time. Melanie is still a distant concern, an annoyance that no longer has the power to disrupt my daily life. She faced the results of her own actions, proving that when you try to use the legal system as a tool for personal grievances, it often leads to unintended outcomes for the person pursuing it. As for me, I still wear my $10 watch because it reminds me that the value of things is not always in the price, but in the peace you have while you use them. I have learned that you do not have to rescue everyone from their own choices, especially when they are the ones creating the situation. Today, I enjoy my home, my work, and the wonderful feeling that the only manila envelope that will come through my door will hopefully be just a simple utility bill. She pursued this path, and in the end, the process delivered an outcome based on the evidence of her behavior, the consequences of her own decisions. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.